The stagecoach jostled violently as it crossed into Cherokee Territory, sending Catherine Blackwood lurching against the leather upholstery. She pressed a handkerchief to her lips, stifling another cough as the Oklahoma dust seeped through the carriage windows. 5 days of travel had left her exhausted, her simple grey dress hanging loosely on her diminished frame, despite her best efforts to appear presentable. "Riverwood Station coming up," the driver called from outside. "Last stop, before Twin Pines." Catherine's heart fluttered with nervous anticipation. Riverwood, the name that had danced through her fever dreams for months now, ever since the first letter had arrived at her cramped Philadelphia boarding house. She removed a folded paper from her pocket, traced with her trembling fingers. Over the neat penmanship of Thomas Harrington, cattle rancher, and her soon-to-be husband. The other passengers, a missionary couple and their young daughter, regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The woman leaned forward, adjusting her modest bonnet. "You must be the mail-order bride they're expecting in Twin Pines," she said, her eyes lingering on Catherine's pallid complexion. "Mrs. Shepherd at the general store mentioned it when we passed through last week." "Yes," Catherine replied, tucking the letter away. "My fiancé awaits." The word still felt foreign on her tongue. Fiancé. A man she had never met but had exchanged a dozen heartfelt letters with over the past 6 months. A man who had described his prosperous ranch, his desire for companionship, and his willingness to welcome a proper Eastern lady into his life. "All alone in Indian Territory," the missionary's wife remarked, her brow furrowed. "You're a brave soul." Catherine wouldn't have chosen the word brave. Desperate, perhaps. After 3 years of battling the lingering effects of pneumonia, losing her position as a schoolteacher when her frequent illnesses became too disruptive, and facing eviction from her boarding house, the matrimonial advertisement in the matrimonial news had seemed like divine intervention. "Established rancher seeks bride, 38 years of age, prosperous homestead in Oklahoma Territory. Seeking companion of gentle disposition and proper education. Must appreciate frontier living. Photograph appreciated." Catherine had hesitated before sending her photograph. The illness had hollowed her cheeks and dimmed the luster of her once vibrant auburn hair. But honesty seemed paramount for such an arrangement, so she included a recent portrait, along with a letter describing her education, her love of literature, her experience keeping a household budget, and her desire for a fresh start. What she hadn't mentioned was the recurring fever that had plagued her for 3 years, the weakness in her lungs that Philadelphia's coal smoke had only exacerbated. Thomas Harrington had responded enthusiastically, seeming unbothered by her thin appearance in the photograph, writing of Oklahoma's clean air and how it had restored many an Easterner's health. The stagecoach lurched to a halt, jolting Catherine. From her thoughts, "Riverwood Station," the driver announced. Catherine gathered her small valise, all she had been able to bring, and carefully tucked Thomas's letters inside. She adjusted her bonnet, patted her cheeks, hoping to bring some color to them, and accepted the driver's hand as she descended from the coach. "Good fortune to you, Miss Blackwood," the missionary's wife called from the window. "Thank you." Catherine nodded politely and turned to face her future. Riverwood Station was little more than a trading post, a stable, and a small depot where the stagecoach paused before continuing to larger settlements. A handful of buildings lined what generously might be called a main street, their raw timber facades speaking to the frontier's youth. Men in dust-covered clothes moved between the trading post and stable, a few Native Americans in a mixture of traditional and European clothing conducted business nearby, and two women in practical frontier dresses compared goods outside the general store. Catherine stood beside her valise, the Oklahoma sun beating down on her uncovered face, scanning the small crowd for Thomas Harrington. His letters had described him as tall, with brown hair graying at the temples, a description that could match half the men present. "You look a bit lost, miss." A young girl of perhaps 10 approached, her calico dress dusty at the hem. "Stage don't come through often. You meeting someone?" "Yes," Catherine replied, trying to keep the breathlessness from her voice. "Mr. Thomas Harrington. Do you know him?" The girl's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Harrington? Yes'm, everyone knows him. His ranch is about 5 miles outside town." She squinted down the street. "That's him there coming out of Whitaker's store." Catherine followed her gaze, and her pulse quickened. A man was emerging from a shop down the street, tall and broad-shouldered in a worn duster coat. Even from this distance, she could see he matched the description from the letters. Brown hair graying at the temples, a neatly trimmed beard, and a purposeful way of moving that suggested confidence. "Thank you," she whispered to the girl, who shrugged and scampered off. Catherine smoothed her dress with trembling hands and picked up her valise. This was the moment she had traveled over 1,000 miles for, the beginning of her new life. She took a deep breath, which triggered a small cough, and walked toward him. Thomas Harrington was examining a ledger when he sensed someone approaching. He looked up, his expression initially neutral, then questioning as he saw Catherine walking directly toward him. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice steadier than she expected given the riot of nerves in her stomach. "Yes?" He studied her face, no recognition in his eyes. "I'm Catherine Blackwood from Philadelphia." She waited for understanding to dawn. It came slowly, his brow furrowing before his eyes widened. "Miss Blackwood, you're here." "Yes," she smiled, tentatively. "I received your letter confirming our arrangement. I came as soon as I could." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, certainly, but also something else Catherine couldn't quite name. Disappointment, perhaps. "Miss Blackwood, He cleared his throat, glancing around as if searching for a way out of the conversation. "I wasn't expecting you for another week. Your last letter said any time after May 1st would be suitable," she reminded him gently. "It's now the 10th. "Yes, of course," he nodded, still seeming disoriented by her presence. His eyes traveled over her, taking in her plain dress, her worn valise, and lingering particularly on her pale complexion. His expression hardened slightly. "You look unwell," he said flatly. Heat crept into Catherine's cheeks. "The journey was taxing. I'm sure after some rest—" A cough interrupted her, the dry Oklahoma air irritating her sensitive lungs. She quickly covered her mouth with her handkerchief, mortified as the spasm continued for several seconds. Thomas's jaw tightened, his gaze now cool and assessing rather than welcoming. "Perhaps we should speak somewhere more private," he said, leading her toward a small cafe attached to the hotel. Inside, the dimly lit space was mostly empty, with only an older couple seated near the window. Thomas selected a table in the bare, far corner and pulled out a chair for Catherine with stiff courtesy. Once seated, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. Catherine folded her hands in her lap to keep them from fidgeting. "Coffee?" Thomas finally asked. "Yes, please." Her mouth was dry with apprehension. He signaled to a waitress, ordered 2 coffees, then turned back to Catherine, his handsome face now guarded, so different from the warmth she had imagined behind his written words. "Miss Blackwood," he began after the coffee arrived, I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Catherine's heart sank. "What kind of misunderstanding, Mr. Harrington?" He stirred his coffee slowly, not meeting her eyes. "In your letters, you described yourself as being of somewhat delicate health, but recovering." "Yes," she replied quietly. "Your photograph showed a thin woman, but not—" He paused, searching for words. "Not someone with consumption." Catherine finished for him, her voice barely audible. His eyes snapped to hers. "Is that what it is?" "No," she said firmly. "I suffered pneumonia 3 years ago. My lungs were weakened, and Philadelphia's air made recovery difficult. Your letters spoke of Oklahoma's healthy climate. You thought frontier life would cure you," he finished, his voice hardening. "Miss Blackwood, running a ranch requires strength and vitality. My wife would need to manage the household, entertain business associates, potentially help with the cattle operation in emergencies. I cannot build a future with someone who might—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. The words struck Catherine like physical blows. She had known coming west was a risk, but she hadn't expected such a cold assessment of her worth based solely on her health. "I have skills, Mr. Harrington," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'm educated, I can keep accounts, manage a household, skills I can hire for less than the cost of supporting an invalid wife," he cut in. "I'm sorry if this seems cruel, Miss Blackwood, but I must think practically. The winters here are harsh, the distances between doctor and homestead vast. Your condition would only worsen." Outside the window, a group of men passed by, laughing loudly. 2 of them glanced inside, their eyes landing on Catherine and Thomas, curiosity evident. One nudged the other and whispered something. Word travelled. Fast in small towns, Catherine realized. Already they knew who she must be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special. For you? I've already announced our engagement at church, Thomas continued, lowering his voice. Folks have been congratulating me, but under the circumstances. You wish to rescind your proposal, Catherine stated flatly. I think it would be best, he replied, at least having the decency to look uncomfortable. I can provide you with enough money for a return ticket to Philadelphia. Catherine's fingernails dug into her palms beneath the table. And what would I return to, Mr. Harrington? I gave up my room. I sold what furniture I owned. A flicker of guilt crossed his face, quickly replaced by resolve. That's not my concern, Miss Blackwood. I made no promises about accepting you regardless of your condition. No, she agreed, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. You merely implied it with every letter. She could feel the stares of the other patrons now, the weight of their judgment and curiosity. What will you tell them? She nodded toward the window where more townsfolk were passing by, some slowing to peek inside. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. The truth, that there was a misunderstanding. The truth, Catherine repeated, her voice barely audible, that I'm too sickly to be worthy of becoming Mrs. Harrington. His jaw clenched. I have a reputation in this territory, Miss Blackwood. A standing. I can't appear foolish. No, she agreed, a strange calm settling over her despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Better that I appear foolish instead. The desperate invalid who came west with nothing but a valise and misplaced hope. Thomas opened his mouth to reply, but the cafe door swung open and a boisterous group of cowboys entered, trail dusty and loud. One spotted Thomas and raised a hand in greeting. "Harrington, there you are!" The man approached their table, his smile fading as he sensed the tension. His eyes moved to Catherine, curious. "This the mail-order bride we've been hearing about?" Catherine stiffened at the crude description. Thomas stood abruptly. "Not now, Jenkins." But Jenkins was already extending a hand to Catherine. "Welcome to Riverwood, ma'am. You sure travelled a long way. When's the wedding?" The cafe had gone quiet, all eyes on their table. Catherine saw the panic in Thomas's face, the desperation to avoid public embarrassment. "There won't be a wedding," Thomas said tightly. "There's been a misunderstanding." Jenkins looked between them, confusion clear on his weathered face. "Misunderstanding? What kind of—" "The kind where I expected a bride with vitality, not a sickly woman 1 winter away from the graveyard," Thomas snapped, his composure finally breaking under the pressure of public scrutiny. A collective gasp rippled through the cafe. Catherine sat frozen, the words echoing in her ears. She had endured much in her 28 years, the loss of her parents to influenza, her own illness, poverty, the countless small humiliations that came with being a woman alone in the world. But never had she felt so utterly exposed, so completely stripped of dignity. With mechanical precision she stood, smoothed her dress, and picked up her valise. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I won't trouble you further." Without waiting for a response, she walked out of the cafe, past the staring faces, into the harsh sunlight of an Oklahoma afternoon. Behind her, she could hear the buzz of conversation erupting, Thomas's voice rising defensively. Catherine didn't look back. She walked down the main street, her mind racing. She had exactly 37 cents in her pocket. Not enough for a room, not enough for a meal, certainly not enough for a ticket back east. The sun beat down mercilessly, as if to emphasize the bleakness of her situation. At the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open country, she stopped. Miles of prairie stretched before her, dotted with distant cattle and the occasional homestead. This was the West she had dreamed of, the open possibility of it, now just another cruel reminder of all she couldn't have. A wagon rattled past, the driver tipping his hat politely before continuing on. Catherine watched it disappear down the dusty road, then turned and began walking again, this time away from town. She had no destination in mind, only the blind need to escape the whispers and stares. "I won't cry," she told herself firmly. "Not for him, not for any of it." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Catherine looked up to see storm clouds gathering on the western horizon, moving steadily closer. Perfect, she thought with grim humor. A fitting end to a disastrous day. She should find shelter, she knew. But where? Return to Riverwood and face the humiliation again. Sleep beneath a tree and hope the storm passes quickly. As the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, splashing into the dusty road and dotting her grey dress with darker patches, Catherine realized that for the first time in her life, she had no plan, no next step to take. She had gambled everything on Thomas Harrington's promise of a future, and she had lost. The rain came harder now, soaking through her thin dress. Catherine gathered her valise and scanned the landscape for any sign of shelter. Through the curtain of rain, she noticed what appeared to be a small cabin in a grove of trees about a quarter-mile from the road. With no better option available, she began walking toward it, each step a battle against the increasingly muddy ground. The storm intensified, wind driving the rain sideways. Catherine's dress clung to her like a second skin, her hair plastered to her face. Lightning cracked overhead, followed almost immediately by a deafening clap of thunder. She quickened her pace, ignoring the burning in her lungs as she struggled up a slight incline. As she drew closer, she could see that the structure was indeed a cabin, small but solid-looking, with smoke rising from a stone chimney despite the warm season. A covered porch, wrapped around two sides, and what looked like an herb garden flourished nearby, protected from the worst of the storm by the surrounding trees. Someone was home. Catherine hesitated at the edge of the clearing. She had no desire to face more rejection today, but the storm left her little choice. She would ask only for temporary shelter until the worst of the weather passed. Surely no one would be heartless enough to refuse such a basic kindness. With that thin hope clutched tight, she made her way to the cabin door. The rain hammered against her shoulders as she approached. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the dwelling in harsh white light before plunging it back into the grey shroud of the storm. Her fingers, numb with cold, knocked against the wooden door. For several heartbeats, there was no response. She was about to knock again when the door swung open, golden lamplight spilling onto the porch. A woman stood in the doorway, not what Catherine had expected. She was perhaps 40, with long, black hair streaked with silver and pulled back in a simple braid. Her complexion was copper, her features distinctly Native American, with high cheekbones and dark, intelligent eyes that took in Catherine's bedraggled appearance in one assessing glance. "You are far from town," the woman observed, her English accented but clear, "and caught in the storm." "I'm sorry to trouble you," Catherine managed, fighting back another cough. "I was hoping for shelter until the rain passes." The woman studied her for a moment longer, then stepped back. "Come inside before you catch your death." The simple kindness after Thomas's cruel rejection nearly undid Catherine's composure. She stepped into the cabin, grateful warmth enveloping her immediately. The interior was surprisingly spacious, a single room with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Herbs hung in bunches from the ceiling beams, drying in the warm air. Shelves lined another wall, filled with jars and bottles of various sizes, their contents ranging from powders to liquids in amber and green glass. A loom stood in one corner, a half-finished blanket with intricate patterns stretched across it. Everything was clean and orderly, with none of the frontier sparseness Catherine had expected. "You are shaking," the woman said, moving to a trunk near a curtained alcove. "I have dry clothes." "Thank you," Catherine said, suddenly aware of how water pooled at her feet on the clean wooden floor. "I don't wish to impose." "It is no imposition." "To help someone in need." The woman returned with a bundle of fabric, a simple cotton dress, and a woolen shawl. "I am Ayita of the Muskogee Creek people. Most in town call me Auntie Ayita." "Catherine Blackwood," she replied, accepting the garments. "From Philadelphia." "Philadelphia?" Ayita's eyebrows rose slightly. "You have traveled far to end up alone in a storm." Before Catherine could respond, a coughing fit seized her, more severe than before. She turned away, mortified, as her lungs spasmed painfully. When she recovered, she found Ayita watching her with a healer's assessing gaze. "How long have you had this cough?" the woman asked. 3 years, Catherine admitted, seeing no point in concealment. "It comes and goes." Ayita nodded thoughtfully. "Change into dry clothes. Behind the curtain there." She gestured to the alcove. "Then we will talk." The alcove contained a narrow bed covered in a colourful quilt. Catherine changed quickly, grateful to be free of her sodden garments. The dress Aita had provided was simple but well made, the fabric soft against her skin. It was slightly short on her taller frame, but otherwise fit well enough. When she emerged, Aita had placed a steaming cup on the table. "Drink," she instructed, indicating the chair. "It will ease your breathing." Catherine hesitated only briefly before sitting and sipping the liquid. It tasted of honey and herbs, bitter but not unpleasant. Almost immediately she felt her tight chest begin to loosen. "What is this?" she asked, taking another sip. "Mullein, honey, a little wild cherry bark." Aita moved around the cabin efficiently, adding wood to the fire and hanging Catherine's wet dress on a rack nearby. Old medicine. "It's effective," Catherine observed, breathing more easily than she had in days. "Nature provides healing if we know where to look." Aita settled in the chair across from her. "Now tell me why a Philadelphia woman with weak lungs is wandering alone in a thunderstorm in Cherokee Territory." Catherine cupped the warm mug in her hands, finding unexpected comfort in the direct question after so much deception and disappointment. "I came to marry a rancher named Thomas Harrington," she said simply. "He decided I was too sickly to be a suitable wife." She expected pity, perhaps, or awkward sympathy. Instead, Aita snorted. "Thomas Harrington is a fool who values appearance over substance," she said matter-of-factly. "You were fortunate to escape that arrangement." The blunt assessment startled a laugh from Catherine, which quickly turned into another cough, though milder than before. "It doesn't feel fortunate at the moment," she admitted once she recovered. "I have nowhere to go and very little money." Aita considered her over the rim of her own cup. "What did you do in Philadelphia?" "I was a schoolteacher. Before that, I assisted my father in his bookshop until he and my mother died of influenza." "And what will you do now?" Catherine stared into her cup, the question that had haunted her steps from the cafe hanging between them. "I don't know," she admitted, the words painful in their honesty. I had thought Oklahoma's air might help my condition, that I might find a new beginning here." "The air here is good," Aita agreed. "But healing takes more than good air. It takes time, proper medicine, and a willing spirit." She studied Catherine again, her dark eyes penetrating. "You have the spirit, I think." The rain continued its assault on the cabin roof, but inside, Catherine felt a curious calm descending. Perhaps it was the herb tea, or simply the relief of finding shelter. But something about Aita's presence was undeniably comforting. "Tomorrow I will take you to town," Aita said, rising to check Catherine's dress. "You can ask at the hotel about work." "No," Catherine interrupted, then flushed at her own vehemence. "Forgive me, but after today's incident, I don't think I would find a welcome reception in Riverwood." Understanding dawned in Aita's eyes. "Ah, Harrington made a public spectacle of his rejection." Catherine nodded, embarrassment burning in her cheeks. "In front of half the town, it seemed. Small towns thrive on others' misfortunes," Aita said with a trace of bitterness. "They will be talking about this for weeks." The thought made Catherine's stomach clench. She had hoped for anonymity in the West, a chance to build a life without the shadow of pity that had followed her in Philadelphia. Instead, she had found only more humiliation. "There is another option," Aita said after a moment of consideration. "I need help with my garden and preparing my medicines. The work is not difficult, but my hands are not as nimble as they once were." She gestured to her fingers, which Catherine now noticed were slightly gnarled with age or arthritis. "I can offer you shelter and meals in exchange for assistance. It would give you time to recover your strength and decide what path to take next." Catherine stared at the woman, searching for the trap in her offer. "You would take in a stranger? Someone you know nothing about?" "I know enough," Ayita said simply. "I know you walked away from Harrington's cruelty with dignity. I know you sought shelter rather than succumb to despair. And I know something of feeling unwelcome in a place that should be home." There was a story there, Catherine sensed, but now wasn't the time to pry. "I accept your generous offer," she said quietly, "though I know little about herbal medicine." "You can learn," Ayita replied with a slight smile. "If you have taught children, you can surely be taught yourself." The storm continued through the evening, but inside Ayita's cabin, Catherine found herself relaxing for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach. They shared a simple meal of cornbread and bean stew, which Catherine found surprisingly flavorful after days of bland travel food. "You should rest," Ayita said when they had finished eating. "The journey and storm have taxed your strength. Tomorrow is soon enough to begin our arrangement." She showed Catherine to the curtained alcove, providing an extra blanket and a small pot of salve for your chest to ease the night breathing. The simple consideration brought a lump to Catherine's throat after a day of callous treatment. As she prepared for bed, Catherine could hear Ayita moving quietly around the main room, banking the fire and tidying their meal things. The domestic sounds were comforting, a reminder that she was no longer alone on the vast Oklahoma prairie. The narrow bed was more comfortable than it appeared, the mattress stuffed with what felt like corn husks and herbs that released a pleasant, soothing scent when she lay down. Outside, the storm was passing, the thunder now a distant rumble rather than the immediate threat it had been. Catherine applied the salve as instructed, its pungent aroma filling her senses with pine and something earthy she couldn't identify. Almost immediately, her lungs felt clearer, the persistent tickle that often kept her awake subsiding to a manageable awareness. Sleep came surprisingly easily, deep and dreamless, in a way she hadn't experienced in years. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the small window near the bed, painting patterns on the wooden floor. For a moment, Catherine stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, disoriented. Then the memories of the previous day crashed over her. The rejection, the storm, Ayita's unexpected kindness. She sat up slowly, relieved to find her chest relatively clear this morning, the usual dawn coughing fit notably absent. She dressed, in her own clothes, now dry if somewhat wrinkled, and emerged from behind the curtain to find Ayita already up and working at a table covered with plants and jars. "Good morning," Catherine said, suddenly self-conscious. "I hope I haven't overslept." "There is no such thing here," Ayita replied without looking up from her work. "We rise with the sun and rest when darkness falls." She gestured to the stove where a pot simmered. "There is porridge and tea." Catherine served herself, watching as Ayita's deft fingers sorted leaves and stems into different piles. Despite the slight stiffness in her joints, the older woman moved with practiced efficiency. "What are you making?" Catherine asked, settling. "At the table with her breakfast. Medicine for Mrs. Whitaker's rheumatism," Ayita replied. "And a tonic for Reverend Ellis's wife. She expects a child soon and suffers from sickness." "You provide remedies for the townspeople?" Catherine was surprised, given what seemed like Ayita's deliberate distance from Riverwood. A small smile curved Ayita's lips. They may not welcome me at their church socials, but they come readily enough when the doctor is 3 days' ride away and their bones ache or their children fever. The irony wasn't lost on Catherine. Yet they still treat you as an outsider. I am an outsider, Aita said simply, by choice as much as circumstance. After my husband died, I found peace in this solitude. She looked up from her work, studying, Catherine with those penetrating dark eyes. But there is a difference between solitude and loneliness. I chose the former. You have had the latter thrust upon you. The observation struck close to Catherine's heart. Since her parents' deaths, she had indeed been profoundly lonely, her illness isolating her further from what few connections remained. "How can I help you today?" she asked, eager to prove her usefulness despite her condition. Aita considered for a moment. "Your hands look capable. Can you write clearly?" "Yes, I was a schoolteacher, remember." "Good. I need labels made for these medicines. My own writing is not as neat as it once was." She indicated a shelf with paper, ink, and a pen. "Each jar needs the contents, the use, and the proper dosage recorded. I will tell you what to write." It was simple work, but satisfying. As the morning progressed, Catherine found herself fascinated by Aita's knowledge. Each remedy had a story, how it was discovered, what plants were required, the proper way to prepare it. Aita spoke of her medicines not as mysterious potions, but as practical solutions derived from generations of careful observation. "The land provides what we need, if we learn to see it," she explained as they worked. "My grandmother taught me to read the plants, to understand their language. Each one has a purpose, even those your people call weeds. My people have much to learn," Catherine acknowledged, carefully transcribing the instructions for a fever remedy. Aita nodded approvingly. "That is the beginning of wisdom, recognizing what you do not know." By midday, they had labeled 24 containers. Catherine's handwriting was indeed clearer than Aita's arthritic script, the labels neat and legible. She felt a small surge of pride at having made herself useful, however modestly. "You have a good hand," Aita observed, as they broke for a simple lunch of corn cakes and dried berries. "Steady and precise." "Thank you," Catherine said, warmth spreading through her at the simple praise. "After we eat, I will show you the garden. There is much to harvest before the next rain." The prospect of outdoor work concerned Catherine slightly. Would her lungs cooperate? But she was determined to earn her keep. "I'd like that." As they finished their meal, a sound outside caught their attention, the approach of horses, moving at a steady trot. Aita's expression grew wary. "We have visitors," she said, moving to the window. Her body tensed as she looked out. "Thomas Harrington and Sheriff Burke." Catherine's stomach clenched with dread. What could Thomas Harrington possibly want with her now? Had public humiliation not been enough? "Stay inside," Aita instructed, her voice calm but firm. She straightened her simple dress and stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. Though the thick logs of the cabin, Catherine could only make out muffled voices. She moved to the window, careful to remain partly hidden behind the curtain. Thomas sat astride a chestnut stallion, looking every inch the prosperous rancher in a fresh shirt and waistcoat, his hat pulled low against the midday sun. Beside him, a heavy-set man with a silver star pinned to his vest, presumably Sheriff Burke, slouched in his saddle, looking bored and uncomfortable. Aita stood on the porch, her posture straight and dignified, despite being a head shorter than the mounted men. She appeared to be answering questions, her responses too quiet for Catherine to hear. Thomas gestured emphatically, his voice occasionally rising enough for fragments to reach her. "Do responsibility to ensure Eastern woman alone, not suitable for frontier life." Sheriff Burke said something that made Thomas frown. The conversation continued for several minutes, growing increasingly tense. Finally, Aita crossed her arms, a gesture Catherine was beginning to recognize as a sign of her unmovable resolve. "Miss Blackwood is my guest," her voice rose clearly now, "and will remain so as long as she wishes. Unless you have a warrant or legal cause, Sheriff Burke, I suggest you and Mr. Harrington return to town." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now, Auntie Aita, we're just concerned for the lady's welfare. Being rejected can make a woman unpredictable." Catherine's cheeks burned at the implication. Did they think she might harm herself? Or was this merely Thomas's attempt to avoid scandal by forcing her to return east? "I assure you," Aita replied, her voice cold as winter frost, "Miss Blackwood is perfectly safe and of sound mind. More sound, perhaps, than those who would reject a bride for circumstances beyond her control." Thomas's face darkened. "You overstep, woman. This isn't your affair." "You made it my affair when she sought shelter at my door," Aita countered. "Cherokee Territory may be under white man's law now, but this cabin still stands on Creek land, passed down through my mother's line. You have no authority here." Sheriff Burke cleared his throat. "That's true enough, Tom. Without cause I can't compel the lady to come with us." He tipped his hat to Aita. "We'll be on our way then, but if Miss Blackwood changes her mind about returning east, the stage comes through on Thursdays." "I will inform her," Aita said with cool courtesy. Thomas wasn't ready to concede. "This isn't proper, Sheriff. An educated Eastern lady staying with a what, Mr. Harrington?" Aita's voice had dropped dangerously low. The sheriff, evidently possessing more sense than Thomas, intervened. "We've delivered our message, Tom. Let's get back to town." He nodded once more to Aita. "Good day to you, ma'am." With visible reluctance, Thomas turned his horse. As they rode away, Catherine heard him say, "The church ladies won't like this one bit, having a white woman staying with—" "Let the church ladies tend their own gardens," the sheriff replied, his voice fading as they disappeared down the path. Aita remained on the porch until the riders were out of sight, then returned inside. Her expression was composed, but Catherine could see tension in the set of her shoulders. "I'm so sorry," Catherine began. "I never meant to bring trouble to your door." Aita waved away the apology. "Thomas Harrington has been bringing trouble to my door since he arrived in this territory. This is merely his latest attempt." "There's history between you?" A shadow crossed Aita's face. "There is history between my people and all who came to claim this land as their own," she said simply. "But yes, Harrington and I have our particular quarrels." She moved to the stove, stirring the pot of medicine that had been simmering. "He wanted to buy this land when he first arrived 5 years ago. When I refused, he tried to have the territorial government declare it abandoned, claiming no real settler lived here." Her smile was without humor. "The judge, thankfully, recognized my Creek mother's deed, signed by the Cherokee Nation and later acknowledged by the U.S. government during the land treaties." Catherine was beginning to understand the complex web she had inadvertently entered. "And he's held that against you ever since?" Men like Harrington do not forget being thwarted by those they consider beneath them, Ayita replied. Particularly when those people are Indian and female. The revelation of Thomas's character made Catherine's narrow escape seem even more fortunate. She shuddered to think of being tied to such a man for life. "Will they return?" she asked. "Perhaps. Harrington is not one to surrender easily." Ayita turned from the stove, fixing Catherine with her penetrating gaze. "Does this change your mind? About staying? I would understand if you wished to take the next stage east." The question deserved careful consideration. Remaining meant potentially facing more confrontation, more gossip, more barriers to acceptance in this small frontier community. Yet the thought of retreating to Philadelphia, to the life she had barely survived before, filled her with even greater dread. "No," Catherine said firmly. "I came west for a new beginning, and I intend to find it, with or without Thomas Harrington's approval." Something like approval flickered in Ayita's dark eyes. "Good. Now let us see to the garden. The plants do not care about white men's opinions." The garden beyond the cabin was larger than Catherine had initially realized. Nearly an acre of carefully tended beds arranged in concentric circles around a central clearing. Plants of all descriptions grew in organized sections, tall stalks, with delicate flowers, low-growing herbs with pungent leaves, thorny bushes heavy with berries, and dozens of varieties Catherine couldn't begin to identify. "This is remarkable," she breathed, taking in the abundance. "You tend all this yourself?" "With difficulty lately," Ayita admitted, flexing her stiff fingers. "Age makes the body less willing than the spirit." She led Catherine through the garden, naming plants and their uses as they walked. Some were familiar, sage, lavender, rosemary, but many were unknown to Catherine's Eastern experience. "These require harvesting today." Ayita indicated a section of plants with purple cone-shaped flowers. "Echinacea. Excellent for strengthening the body against illness, perhaps helpful for your condition." Catherine knelt carefully by the plants, mindful of her skirts. "Show me how to gather them properly." Ayita demonstrated the technique. Cutting the stems at a specific angle, leaving enough of the plant to regrow, thanking it softly in her native language before taking what was needed. "The plants give their medicine willingly," she explained, "but we must show respect by taking only what we need and acknowledging the gift." Catherine followed her example, working slowly at first, but with increasing confidence. The physical activity was tiring but not overwhelming, and she found the fresh air and gentle movement actually seemed to ease her breathing rather than aggravate it. They worked through the afternoon, harvesting several varieties of medicinal plants. Ayita was a patient teacher, correcting Catherine's technique with gentle guidance rather than criticism. By the time the sun began its descent, they had filled 2 baskets with the day's gathering. "Enough for today," Ayita declared. "Tomorrow we will prepare these for drying." As they returned to the cabin, Catherine felt a deep satisfaction she hadn't experienced in years. Despite her illness, despite Thomas's rejection, despite the uncertain future, today she had done useful work with her hands, learned new skills, and contributed to her own keeping. "You smile," Ayita observed as they set the baskets on the work table. "I do," Catherine admitted. "It feels good to be productive again." "Work that nourishes the spirit is the best medicine," Ayita said wisely. "Better than any herb I could give you." That evening, as they prepared a simple supper together, Catherine found herself telling Ayita more about her life in Philadelphia, Her father's bookshop, with its towering shelves and perpetual smell of paper and leather, her mother's volunteer work with the Church Aid Society, her own love of teaching. Before illness had claimed her strength, "I miss the children most," she confessed, seeing their faces when understanding would dawn. There's nothing quite like witnessing that moment. Aita listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about Eastern life and education. After they ate, she surprised Catherine by retrieving a worn, leather-bound book from a trunk near her bed. "My husband's," she explained, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "He was educated at the mission school and later taught there. These were his lesson materials." She opened the book, revealing pages of careful handwriting, vocabulary, lists, grammar exercises, mathematical problems, all designed for teaching Indian children the white man's knowledge. "John believed our people needed to understand both worlds to survive," Aita said, a hint of old grief in her voice. "He taught Creek and Cherokee children alongside the settlers' children for 15 years. Catherine turned the pages with care, recognizing the meticulous work of a dedicated teacher. "He must have been remarkable." "He was," Aita agreed, "until the fever took him 6 years ago." She closed the book gently. "Sometimes I think of reopening his school. There are children nearby, Creek, Cherokee, white, black, all in need of learning. But the times have changed. Parents are more fearful now, more separated by the invisible lines we draw between peoples. The revelation of this shared connection, education, loss, dreams deferred, created a deeper understanding between them. Catherine found herself wondering if perhaps her journey west had brought her exactly where she needed to be, though not in the way she had imagined. "Perhaps someday," she offered tentatively. Aita smiled, returning the book to its place. "Perhaps, for now, we have plants to tend and medicines to make." The next morning, Catherine woke to a strange sensation, the absence of pain. For the first time in months, her chest didn't ache with the effort of drawing breath. She lay still for a moment, savoring the simple pleasure of an unrestricted inhalation. When she emerged from behind the curtain, Aita was already at work, spreading the previous day's harvest on drying screens. "You look better," she observed, glancing up from her task. "Your color has improved." "I feel better," Catherine acknowledged. Whatever was in that salve worked wonders. "Bear grease, white pine, wild cherry," Aita replied matter-of-factly. "Old medicine, but effective." After breakfast, Aita showed Catherine how to prepare the plants for drying, removing damaged leaves, cutting some to expose more surface area, bundling others to hang from the ceiling beams. "Different plants require different methods," she explained. "Some must dry quickly, to preserve their strength, others slowly to develop their properties." As they worked, Catherine found herself asking questions about each plant, not just its medicinal use, but its growth habits, its relationship to other plants, the stories Aita's people told about its origin. Aita answered patiently, occasionally, expressing surprise at Catherine's quick grasp of botanical relationships. "You have a natural understanding of living things," she remarked, as Catherine correctly identified a plant family without being told. "My father loved botany," Catherine explained. "He kept illustrated volumes in the bookshop and taught me the classifications when I was young. I never thought the knowledge would prove so practical." By midday, they had processed most of the harvest. Catherine's fingers were stained green and her back ached pleasantly from the unfamiliar labor, but her breathing remained easy and her energy hadn't flagged as it typically would have by this time. "We should go to the creek," Aita announced, as they finished their noon meal. "Your hands need washing, and I need to gather watercress." Catherine hesitated. "Will it be safe?" After yesterday's confrontation with Thomas and the sheriff, she was wary of venturing beyond the cabin's protective walls. "The creek is on my land," Aita assured her, "and few from town come this way. Besides," she added with a hint of mischief, "the water has healing properties you will not find in your Eastern medical journals." The creek was a short walk through a stand of oak and hickory trees. As they approached, Catherine heard the gentle gurgle of flowing water before she saw the stream itself, clear and shallow, flowing over a bed of smooth stones with occasional deeper pools. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the dappled sunlight playing across the water's surface. "It is sacred to my mother's people," Aita said. "They believed the spirit of healing dwelled in moving water, washing away illness and bringing new life." She knelt by the creek's edge, submerging her hands. "Feel it. The water comes from deep springs. It stays cool even in summer's heat." Catherine followed her example, gasping slightly as she plunged her stained hands into the cold water. The sensation was shocking but refreshing, the current gently massaging her tired fingers as it washed away the plant residue. "Cup your hands and drink," Aita instructed. "Then splash some on your face." Catherine obeyed, finding the water remarkably sweet and clear. As she splashed her face, the cool droplets seemed to wash away more than just dust and fatigue. They carried with them the lingering shame of Thomas's rejection, the fear of an uncertain future, the grief of lost dreams. "There," Aita said approvingly, as Catherine looked up, water dripping from her chin. "Already I see improvement. Your eyes are clearer." They spent an hour by the creek, gathering watercress from the shallows and collecting particularly smooth stones. Aita said were useful for preparing certain medicines. Catherine found herself laughing as she waded ankle-deep, her skirts kilted up, searching for the perfect specimens. It was there, in that unguarded moment of simple joy, that they heard the approaching horses. Aita froze, listening intently. "3 riders," she said softly, "coming from the direction of town." Catherine quickly stepped from the creek, heart pounding. "Thomas again?" "No," Aita replied with certainty. "Different horses. Wait here." She moved silently through the underbrush, toward a small rise that overlooked the path leading from town. Catherine stood motionless, water seeping into her shoes as anxiety replaced her earlier contentment. When Aita returned moments later, her expression was guarded. Reverend Ellis, his wife Emma, and Jenkins from the saloon. The man from yesterday. "At the cafe?" Catherine's stomach clenched at the memory. "Yes, though why he accompanies the Reverend is curious." Aita considered their options. "We can return to the cabin by the back path, if you wish to avoid them." Catherine was tempted to flee, to postpone another confrontation, but running had solved nothing yesterday, and it would solve nothing today. "No," she decided. "I won't hide as if I've done something shameful." Aita nodded, a glimmer of approval in her dark eyes. "Then we continue our work. They will find us or they won't." They resumed gathering watercress, though Catherine's movements were now stiff with tension. Less than 5 minutes passed before hoofbeats announced the visitors' approach. The riders emerged from the trees at the creek's edge, pulling their mounts to a halt when they spotted the women. "Auntie Aita," called the man Catherine presumed was Reverend Ellis. Lean and earnest-looking, with a clerical collar despite the frontier setting. "Good afternoon to you, Reverend." Aita acknowledged, with a slight nod. Mrs. Ellis, Mr. Jenkins. The Reverend's wife, a round-faced woman with kind eyes and advanced pregnancy, smiled tentatively. Jenkins, looking uncomfortable on his horse, merely touched his hat-brim. "And this must be Miss Blackwood," the Reverend continued, his gaze settling on Catherine with undisguised curiosity. Catherine straightened, striving for dignity despite her damp hem and loosened hair. "I am." An awkward silence followed, broken only by the gentle gurgle of the creek and the occasional stamp of a restless horse. "Well," Mrs. Ellis finally said, "we've brought some things for you, Miss Blackwood." She gestured to a bundle tied behind her saddle. "When we heard about your situation, we thought you might need provisions." Catherine wasn't sure whether to be touched or insulted by the charity. "That's very kind, but Aita has generously provided for my needs." "It's not charity, ma'am," Jenkins spoke up, his weathered face reddening slightly. "It's an apology of sorts for yesterday." This surprised Catherine. An apology? Jenkins shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "What Harrington said to you weren't right. Most folks in town agree once they heard the full story." The Reverend nodded solemnly. "Thomas Harrington may be a prominent citizen, but his treatment of you was unchristian, to say the least. The church ladies have sent food, and Mrs. Whitaker included some fabric she thought might suit you for a new dress." Aita remained silent, her face impassive, but Catherine sensed her watchfulness, like a hawk assessing potential threat to its nestling. "Please thank everyone for their kindness," Catherine said carefully. "Though I'm curious, how did you know where to find me?" The Reverend and his wife exchanged glances. "Sheriff Burke mentioned you were staying with Auntie Aita," Mrs. Ellis explained. "We've known Auntie for years. She helped bring our first 2 children into the world when the doctor couldn't reach us in time. And she makes the only remedy that touches Emma's morning sickness," the Reverend added with a grateful smile toward Aita. "We come out this way regularly." "As for me," Jenkins added, "I owed you a proper welcome to Riverwood after how things went yesterday. Figured this was my chance." The sincerity in their voices was unmistakable. These weren't Thomas's proxies come to pressure her return east. They were simply neighbors extending a belated welcome. Something tight in Catherine's chest eased slightly. Perhaps not everyone in Riverwood shared Thomas's cruel assessment of her worth. "We finished our gathering," Aita said, breaking her silence. "If you wish to speak further, we can return to the cabin for tea." The invitation clearly surprised the visitors as much as it did Catherine. Aita rarely welcomed townspeople into her home, Catherine had gathered, preferring to conduct her healing business on the porch or in their homes. "We'd be honored," the Reverend replied after a moment's hesitation. They walked back to the cabin together, the visitors leading their horses. Mrs. Ellis fell in step beside Catherine, her pregnancy making her waddle slightly. "I was sorry to hear about your health troubles," she said softly. "My sister had lung fever as a child. The Oklahoma air helped her considerably." "That's what I'm hoping for," Catherine admitted. "Auntie's remedies work wonders too," Mrs. Ellis added. "Better than anything the doctor from Fort Gibson prescribes. Though don't tell Reverend Ellis I said so. He's still trying to convert me from herbal medicine to modern science." Catherine found herself warming to the woman's forthright manner. "Your secret is safe with me." At the cabin, Aita set water to boil while Catherine helped the visitors settle on the porch. Jenkins brought the bundle from Mrs. Ellis's horse, a basket covered with a checkered cloth that proved to contain bread, preserves, smoked meat, and a length of pale blue calico. "The ladies weren't sure of your measurements," Mrs. Ellis explained, as Catherine admired the fabric, "but Mrs. Whittaker said a skilled needlewoman can make adjustments." "I'm handy enough with a needle," Catherine assured her. "This is truly thoughtful." Ayita emerged with a tray bearing cups of steaming liquid, not regular tea, Catherine noted, but one of her herbal infusions. She offered it without comment, and the visitors accepted with only slight hesitation. "Now," Ayita said, settling on a wooden stool, "what brings you beyond kindness?" "Thomas Harrington sent the sheriff yesterday. Today you come. There is purpose here." The directness of her question seemed to disconcert the Reverend, but Mrs. Ellis merely smiled. "Straight to the heart, as always, Auntie," she said. "Yes, we have a purpose." She turned to Catherine. "We've come to offer you a position, Miss Blackwood." "A position?" Catherine echoed, surprised. The Reverend cleared his throat. "Our schoolteacher, Mrs. Abernathy, is returning east next month. Her husband's health requires a milder climate than Oklahoma's extremes. We need someone to take her place teaching the children of Riverwood and the surrounding homesteads." Catherine stared at him, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "You're offering me a teaching position?" "You mentioned you were a teacher in Philadelphia," Jenkins said. "Word gets around in small towns, good and bad." "But," Catherine struggled to understand. "After what happened with Mr. Harrington, I assumed no one in town would want you?" Mrs. Ellis finished bluntly. "Perhaps some don't. Thomas has friends on the town council. But more families care about their children's education than care about Thomas Harrington's wounded pride. The school is modest," the Reverend continued. 28 students ranging from 5 to 16 years. The pay is $12 a month plus room and board at the boarding house. It was a startlingly generous offer, not in financial terms, but in what it represented. Acceptance, purpose, a place in the community despite her inauspicious beginning. "I don't know what to say," Catherine admitted, overwhelmed. "Say you'll consider it," Mrs. Ellis urged. "Mrs. Abernathy doesn't leave until the end of June, so you have time to decide." Catherine glanced at Ayita, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "I've only just begun helping Ayita with her garden and medicines. There's no need to decide immediately," the Reverend assured her. "And the school term doesn't start until September. There would be time for other arrangements over the summer." The implication was clear. She could continue her unexpected apprenticeship with Ayita while preparing to take on teaching duties in the fall. "I'll consider it carefully," Catherine promised, "and discuss it with Ayita, since she's been kind enough to give me shelter." "Of course," Mrs. Ellis agreed. "We wouldn't want to deprive Auntie of her new helper without her blessing." Jenkins, who had been silent during this exchange, spoke up. "There's one more thing you should know, Miss Blackwood. Harrington's been speaking against you in town, saying you hid the severity of your illness, that you're not fit for frontier life." Catherine's momentary happiness dimmed. "I see what Jenkins means to say," the Reverend interjected with a quelling glance at the cowboy, "is that taking the teaching position would give you a chance to establish yourself independently, to show the community your true character and capabilities." "And Harrington couldn't do much about it," Jenkins added with satisfaction. "School board's elected, not appointed by the town council. He'd have to convince more than his usual cronies to block your appointment." Catherine absorbed this information. recognizing both the opportunity and the challenge it presented. Taking the position would mean directly opposing Thomas's efforts to discredit her, but it would also give her exactly what she'd come west seeking: a fresh start, meaningful work, and the chance to build a life of her own. "Thank you for bringing this opportunity to my attention," she said formally. "I promise to give it serious consideration." They spoke a while longer, with Mrs. Ellis providing details about the school and students before the visitors prepared to depart. As the Reverend helped his wife onto her horse, Jenkins lingered, seeming to wrestle with something unspoken. "Miss Blackwood," he finally said, hat in hand, "there's talk of a dance next Saturday at the Hendersons' barn. Nothing fancy, just neighbors getting together. If you felt up to it, folks would welcome a chance to meet you proper-like." He glanced at Aita. "You too, Auntie, though I know barn dances ain't your usual preference." The invitation was clearly sincere, if awkwardly delivered. Catherine looked to Aita, uncertain how to respond. "We will consider it," Aita replied, surprising Catherine again. "Miss Blackwood's health must be our primary concern." Jenkins nodded, relief evident in his weathered face. "Of course. Just thought I'd mention it." He mounted his horse, tipping his hat to both women. "Ladies," as they watched the visitors ride away, Catherine found herself struggling with conflicting emotions: hope at the unexpected offer and invitation, wariness about Thomas's continued opposition, and confusion over what Aita might think of these developments. "You're quiet," she observed as they returned to the cabin. Aita began gathering the cups from the porch, her movements deliberate. "I am thinking about the teaching position, about many things." Aita carried the tray inside, Catherine following. "About how quickly the wind can change direction. Yesterday, Thomas Harrington declared you unfit before the town. Today, the Reverend offers you their children's education." There was no resentment in her voice, only a thoughtful assessment of the situation's complexities. "I haven't accepted," Catherine pointed out, "and I wouldn't without discussing it with you first. You've given me shelter, taught me your knowledge." "Knowledge freely given requires no repayment," Aita interrupted gently, "and shelter offered in kindness comes without obligation." She set the tray down and turned to face Catherine. "You must decide your own path." "But what do you think I should do?" Aita considered the question, her dark eyes reflecting the wisdom of her years. "I think the Creator does not make accidents. You came to my door for a reason, perhaps not just to heal your body, but to learn certain truths before you begin your new life." "What truths?" Catherine asked, intrigued by this perspective. "That worth is not measured by a man's approval. That healing comes in many forms. That what seems like an ending may be a beginning in disguise." Aita smiled slightly. "These are lessons the children of Riverwood might benefit from as well." The implication was clear. Aita was not opposed to Catherine taking the teaching, in position when the time came. "And until then?" Catherine asked. "Until then, we have plants to tend, medicines to prepare, and much for you to learn." Aita gestured to the bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. "Your lungs will not heal in a day or a week. The summer months here will strengthen you if you use them wisely." Relief washed over Catherine. She wasn't being asked to choose between the unexpected sanctuary she'd found with Aita and the opportunity to resume her teaching vocation. "Then I'll write to the Reverend accepting the position for September, but explaining that I'll continue to recovery here until then. Ayita nodded approvingly. "A wise decision. Now help me prepare these watercress for drying. They lose their virtue if left too long after gathering." They worked in companionable silence for a time, Catherine's mind still processing the day's unexpected turn of events. Finally, a question that had been nagging at her found voice. "Ayita, why did you invite them to tea?" "You seemed surprised." "At your own invitation," the older woman's hands stilled momentarily, "because it is time." "Time for what?" "Time to build bridges instead of walls." Ayita resumed her work, carefully separating leaves from stems. "For many years after John died, I withdrew from the town, from people. It was easier to be the mysterious Indian healer living alone in the woods than to engage with those who saw me as different, less." She glanced up, meeting Catherine's gaze directly. "But walls that protect also isolate. I have been alone too long." The admission carried weight, suggesting that perhaps Catherine's arrival had affected Ayita as much as Ayita's kindness had affected Catherine. "The dance," Catherine ventured. "Do you truly wish to attend?" A soft laugh escaped Ayita, the first Catherine had heard from her. "Not particularly, but you should, if your health permits. It would be good for the townspeople to see you as you are, not as Thomas Harrington has described you." "I'm not much of a dancer, even when healthy," Catherine admitted. "Dancing is not the purpose," Ayita replied with unexpected wisdom. "Connection is, and that is something both of us have avoided for too long." The next few days fell into a rhythm. Mornings spent tending the garden and harvesting plants, afternoons devoted to preparing medicines or processing herbs for storage. Each evening, Ayita would select specific remedies for Catherine's condition: teas to strengthen her lungs, salves to ease night breathing, tonics to build her blood. The effects were remarkable. By the end of the week, Catherine's persistent cough had diminished to occasional clearing of her throat. She could work in the garden for hours without becoming winded, and her appetite had returned with surprising vigor. "You are a natural healer," she told Ayita one evening as they prepared dinner together. "In Philadelphia, the doctors only prescribed rest and awful-tasting syrups that did nothing for my condition. Western medicine treats the body as separate parts," Ayita replied, stirring a pot of fragrant stew. "Creek medicine sees the whole. Person, body, mind, spirit. You cannot heal one without attending to the others." "Is that why you included those creek baths in my treatment?" Catherine asked, slicing cornbread. "For my spirit?" Ayita smiled mysteriously. "The water from that creek contains minerals beneficial for lung complaints. But yes, the joy of cool water on a hot day feeds the spirit, which in turn strengthens the body's ability to heal itself." Catherine had written to Reverend Ellis, accepting the teaching position for September, explaining her wish to continue her convalescence and study of native botanicals throughout the summer. His enthusiastic reply had arrived 2 days later, expressing the school board's delight and including a curriculum outline for her review. The Henderson barn dance loomed on the horizon, now just 2 days away. Catherine had spent evenings altering the blue calico the town ladies had sent, creating a simple but flattering dress that disguised her still thin frame while complementing her auburn hair and fair complexion. She was putting the final stitches into the hem when a knock came at the cabin door, unusual as most visitors called out their approach well before reaching the porch. Ayita, who had been grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, set down her tools with a frown. "Stay here," she instructed, moving to the door with caution. When she opened it, Catherine heard a woman's voice, brittle with tension. "I need to speak with Miss Blackwood." "Who asks for her?" Aita's tone was polite but wary. "Sarah Harrington." Thomas's sister. Catherine set aside her sewing and moved to the door, curiosity overcoming apprehension. The woman standing on the porch bore a striking resemblance to Thomas, the same proud bearing and handsome features, though her expression held none of his coldness. She was perhaps 30, dressed in a practical riding habit, her dark hair neatly pinned beneath a small hat. "Miss Harrington," Catherine acknowledged, stepping beside Aita. "This is unexpected." Sarah Harrington's gaze moved between the two women, assessing them both before settling on Catherine. "I imagine it is. May we speak privately?" Aita tensed slightly beside her. "Whatever you wish to say to Miss Blackwood can be said in my presence." "It's all right, Aita," Catherine assured her, though uncertainty churned in her stomach. "We can speak on the porch." Aita nodded reluctantly and returned inside, though Catherine noticed she left the door slightly ajar, close enough to intervene if needed. "Please sit." Catherine indicated the porch chairs. "I'm afraid we have no refreshments prepared." "I didn't come for tea," Sarah replied, though she did take the offered seat. "I came to warn you." "Warn me." Catherine remained standing, her back straight despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "About your brother, among other things." Sarah studied her intently. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "From my brother's description, a frail, sickly woman desperate for security, someone who misrepresented herself to trap a husband." The blunt assessment stung, but Catherine refused to show it. "I never misrepresented anything, Miss Harrington. My letters were honest about my health challenges." "Perhaps not deliberately," Sarah conceded, "but Thomas claims your condition was far worse than your correspondence suggested." "The journey was difficult," Catherine acknowledged. "I looked my worst the day I arrived. And now?" Sarah's eyes took in Catherine's improved color, the steadiness of her breathing. "Aita's remedies have helped considerably. The Oklahoma air agrees with me, as I hoped it would." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "I suspected as much. Which brings me to my warning. Thomas intends to prevent your appointment as schoolteacher." Though she had anticipated Thomas's continued opposition, the confirmation still sent a chill through Catherine. "How?" "By convincing the school board you're unsuitable, too ill for the rigors of teaching, too entangled with Aita's heathen practices to instruct Christian children." Sarah's mouth twisted with distaste at repeating these sentiments. "He's called a special meeting for tomorrow evening." "Why are you telling me this?" Catherine asked carefully. "Surely your loyalty lies with your brother." Something flickered in Sarah's eyes. Anger, perhaps, or old pain. "My loyalty lies with truth, Miss Blackwood. Thomas and I may share blood, but we don't share values." She straightened in her chair. "I've taught those children for the past year when Mrs. Abernathy was too ill to manage alone. They deserve better than to become pawns in my brother's vendetta." Catherine sat down slowly, processing this revelation. "You're the assistant teacher. Unofficially, the board wouldn't approve a permanent position for a woman unmarried and," she hesitated, "considered past her prime for matrimony." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Catherine couldn't help but smile. At the ancient age of 30. 32, Sarah corrected with a wry smile of her own. practically decrepit by frontier standards. The moment of connection surprised them. Both. Sarah cleared her throat, returning to her purpose. The school board meets at 7 tomorrow in the church. If you want this position, you should be there to speak for yourself. Thomas is persuasive when unopposed. Thank you for the warning, Catherine said sincerely. But I'm curious, why do you care whether I get this position? Sarah hesitated, seeming to weigh her response. Because I've seen Thomas do this before. Use his influence to punish those who thwart him or challenge his sense of what's proper. Because the children need a qualified teacher, regardless of my brother's wounded pride. And, she added more softly, because no one deserves to be judged solely on appearances or circumstances beyond their control. There was personal history. Behind those words, Catherine sensed, but it wasn't her place to pry. Instead, she asked, "Will you be at the meeting?" "Yes, though my support may do more harm than good. Thomas and I have public disagreements on many matters, including Ayita," Catherine guessed. Sarah's expression confirmed it. "My brother considers association with Indians, other than for commerce, inappropriate for people of our standing. I find his attitude ignorant and contrary to Christian charity." From inside the cabin came the subtle sounds of Ayita moving about, likely listening to every word, despite her pretense of giving them privacy. "I should go," Sarah said, rising. "Thomas believes I'm in town visiting the dressmaker. If he knew I'd come here, I understand." Catherine stood as well. "Thank you for taking this risk." Sarah paused, studying Catherine once more. "You're stronger than you appear, Miss Blackwood. I suspect my brother recognized that and found it threatening." She extended her hand. "Good luck tomorrow." Catherine shook it, surprised by the firm grip. "Will I see you at the Henderson dance on Saturday?" "I'd never miss a chance to scandalize my brother by dancing with the ranch hands," Sarah replied with unexpected mischief. "Until then." She descended the porch steps and mounted her waiting horse with practiced ease, looking back once to nod farewell, before riding away. When Catherine re-entered the cabin, Ayita was calmly grinding herbs, as if she hadn't been listening. Though her first question betrayed her awareness. "So Thomas moves against us again." "Against me," Catherine corrected, sinking into a chair. "Though he seems to consider my association with you part of the problem." "It always has been," Ayita said matter-of-factly. "Your staying here validates what I offer, suggests there might be wisdom in native ways that white medicine lacks. Thomas cannot allow such a notion to take root." Catherine hadn't considered this dimension, that her presence represented more than just her own situation, but a bridge between worlds Thomas Harrington wanted kept separate. "Sarah suggested I attend the school board meeting tomorrow to defend myself," she said, already dreading the confrontation. "A wise woman, that one," Ayita observed, "unlike her brother." "You know her?" "She comes sometimes for headache remedies. We speak little, but I see her heart is not hardened like his." Ayita set aside her mortar and pestle. "You will go to this meeting?" Catherine nodded slowly. "I must, if I want the teaching position." "And you do want it?" "Yes," Catherine said with growing certainty. "Not just for the security it offers, but because teaching is what I'm meant to do, what I'm good at. Then you will need strength for tomorrow." Ayita moved to her shelves of remedies, "and clear lungs to speak your truth without faltering." That evening, Ayita prepared a special strengthening tea and a chest poultice that smelled of pine and Sweet herbs. Wear this through the night, she instructed. It will draw out the last of the congestion. Catherine slept deeply, waking before dawn, feeling clearer and more energized than she had in months. She spent the morning helping Ayita with the garden, then devoted the afternoon to preparing for the board meeting, reviewing the curriculum Reverend Ellis had sent, planning what she would say in her defense, and selecting her most dignified outfit. "How do I look?" she asked Ayita as the time to depart approached. She wore her grey travelling dress, now cleaned and mended, with a lace collar she'd salvaged from an older garment. "Like a schoolteacher," Ayita replied approvingly. "But, more importantly, your eyes show determination. The board will see that." They had decided that Catherine would go alone. Ayita's presence would only inflame Thomas further and potentially distract from the real issue at hand. The Reverend had sent word that his wife would send their hired boy with a horse for Catherine's. And sure enough, a youth of about 14 arrived promptly at 6:30. "Mrs. Ellis sent me with Daisy," he announced, indicating a gentle-looking mare. "She's steady, even for inexperienced riders." "Thank you," Catherine said, grateful for the consideration. It had been years since she'd ridden, and never Western style. But Daisy indeed proved manageable, even for a novice. The ride to town took 20 minutes, giving Catherine time to rehearse her arguments while enjoying the breathtaking sunset painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of gold and scarlet. As she approached the white-steepled church, she could see several horses and wagons already gathered outside, their owners filing into the modest building. She dismounted carefully, tying Daisy beside the other horses, and took a deep, steadying breath. Inside, the church's main room had been arranged with a table at the front, where 5 individuals sat, the school board, she presumed, facing rows of benches filled with townspeople. More attended than she had expected for a school matter, suggesting news of the confrontation had spread. Thomas Harrington sat in the front row, immaculately dressed as always. He stiffened noticeably when Catherine entered, but didn't turn. Sarah sat several rows behind him, nodding slightly in recognition as Catherine quietly took a seat near the back. Reverend Ellis, who appeared to chair the board, called the meeting to order. "As you know, we're gathered to discuss the appointment of a new teacher following Mrs. Abernathy's departure. The board has received one formal application from Miss Catherine Blackwood, formerly of Philadelphia." Thomas immediately stood. "Reverend, if I may speak to Miss Blackwood's suitability before the board makes its decision." "Mr. Harrington, while we appreciate your interest in school matters, you're not a board member nor a parent of school-aged children," Reverend Ellis pointed out. "Perhaps we should hear from Miss Blackwood herself first." Several murmurs of agreement rose from the assembly. Catherine was surprised at the support, however tentative. "With respect, Reverend," Thomas persisted, "as a founding member of this community and contributor to the school building fund, I believe my concerns should be heard." The Reverend glanced at his fellow board members. The town doctor, a rancher Catherine didn't recognize, Mrs. Whitaker from the store, and an elderly gentleman who appeared to be dozing. After receiving nods from 3 of the 4, he sighed. "Very well, Mr. Harrington, please be brief." Thomas stepped to the front, commanding the room with practiced ease. "Friends and neighbors, I know many of you have met Miss Blackwood in the past week. What you may not know is that she arrived in our community under misleading circumstances." He proceeded to outline his version of events, how Catherine had represented herself as merely delicate rather than chronically ill, how her physical condition upon arrival made her clearly unsuitable for frontier life, and how she had subsequently taken up residence with the Indian woman rather than returning east, where proper medical care was available. "I ask you," he continued, warming to his subject, "is this the sort of person we want influencing our children? Someone whose judgment is so questionable? Someone who has immersed herself in pagan healing rituals instead of seeking proper Christian medical treatment?" Catherine forced herself to sit straight, to maintain her dignity despite the humiliation of having her personal matters discussed so publicly. She noticed several townspeople shifting uncomfortably, while others nodded in agreement with Thomas's assessment. Furthermore, Thomas concluded, Miss Blackwood's health makes her an impractical choice. Teaching is demanding work. The first winter cold that sweeps through the schoolroom will likely incapacitate her, leaving our children's education disrupted. He returned to his seat with the satisfied air of someone who has made an irrefutable argument. The room was silent. For a moment, the weight of his accusations hanging in the air. "Miss Blackwood," Reverend Ellis said kindly, "would you care to respond?" Catherine rose slowly, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. She moved to the front of the room, conscious of every eye upon her, and faced the assembly directly. "Good evening," she began, pleased that her voice emerged clear and steady. "I came to Oklahoma Territory seeking what many of you sought, a fresh start, clean air, and the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to a growing community." She acknowledged Thomas's presence with a slight nod. "Mr. Harrington is correct that I suffered from respiratory difficulties in Philadelphia. The city's industrial air made recovery from pneumonia nearly impossible, as my physician there confirmed. I was transparent about my health in my correspondence, though admittedly the difficult journey left me in worse condition upon arrival than I had anticipated." She turned to the board. "What Mr. Harrington has not mentioned is that I was a qualified teacher in Philadelphia for 6 years before my illness forced a temporary retirement. I educated children from all walks of life, preparing many for advanced studies or practical professions." From her pocket she withdrew the letters of recommendation she had fortuitously brought west, from the headmaster of her former school, from parents of students, from the church educational committee. She presented these to Reverend Ellis. "As for my current health," she continued, "I invite Dr. Freeman to examine me at his convenience. He will find that Aita's herbal treatments, far from being pagan rituals, have improved my condition remarkably. My breathing is clear, my stamina greatly increased." She paused, gathering courage for what came next. "Regarding my judgment, in accepting Aita's hospitality, when faced with rejection and the prospect of homelessness in a strange territory, I found kindness from an unexpected source. I chose survival over pride. I chose to learn rather than despair. If those decisions reflect poorly on my character, then I accept your judgment." The elderly board member had awakened during her speech and was now watching her with keen interest. Mrs. Whittaker nodded slightly, seeming impressed by Catherine's composure. "I would add," Catherine concluded, "that my experience with Aita has given me insights into natural sciences that would benefit our students. Knowledge comes in many forms, from many sources. A good teacher recognizes this and draws from diverse wells of wisdom to serve her students' needs." She returned to her seat, trembling slightly from the effort, but satisfied she had spoken her truth with dignity. The doctor leaned forward. "Miss Blackwood, I'd be happy to examine you after the meeting, but I must say you appear far healthier than Mr. Harrington's description suggested. Oklahoma air does indeed work wonders for those with lung complaints." Thomas stood again, his face flushed with anger. "Dr. Freeman, with respect, a single examination cannot predict whether Miss Blackwood will relapse when winter comes, or when the first schoolroom illness makes its rounds." "No one can predict such things, Thomas," Sarah spoke up unexpectedly. "Mrs. Abernathy herself missed nearly 6 weeks this past winter with bronchitis, yet no one questioned her appointment." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Thomas shot his sister a look of betrayal before addressing the board again. "There is still the matter of Miss Blackwood's unusual living arrangement. Surely we want our children's teacher to exemplify proper Christian values and associations." At this, Mrs. Ellis struggled to her feet despite her advanced pregnancy. "Reverend, may I speak?" Her husband nodded, clearly surprised by her intervention. "Ajita delivered both my children when no doctor could reach us," she said firmly. "She has healed many in this community when medicine failed. Her knowledge is different from ours, yes, but calling it pagan or unchristian shows ignorance of her character and the Creator she serves." She looked directly at Thomas. "Judge not, lest ye be judged, Mr. Harrington." A chorus of amens followed this pronouncement, and Catherine realized that Ayita had more allies in town than she had suspected. The board conferred briefly among themselves before Reverend Ellis addressed the gathering again. "We appreciate both Mr. Harrington's concerns and Miss Blackwood's candor. The board will now vote on Miss Blackwood's appointment as schoolteacher beginning September 1st. The vote was conducted by raised hands, 3 in favor, 1 abstention, from Dr. Freeman, who wished to examine Catherine first, and none opposed. "Congratulations, Miss Blackwood," Reverend Ellis announced. "Pending Dr. Freeman's medical certification, you are officially appointed as Riverwood's new teacher." A smattering of applause broke out. Thomas stood abruptly and strode from the church, several of his supporters following. But more townspeople remained, approaching Catherine with curious questions and tentative welcomes. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah Harrington made her way to Catherine's side. "Well done," she said quietly. "You've made an enemy today, but also several friends." "Including you?" Catherine asked. Sarah smiled slightly. "I admire courage, Miss Blackwood, and you showed considerable courage tonight." She glanced toward the door where her brother had exited. "Thomas will not forgive easily. Be prepared for further difficulties." "I'm stronger than I look," Catherine replied, echoing Sarah's earlier assessment. "Indeed you are." Sarah turned to leave, then paused. "I'll see you at the dance tomorrow." "I wouldn't miss it." Dr. Freeman concluded his examination with satisfaction. "Remarkable improvement for someone who arrived looking half dead a week ago," he told Catherine, putting away his instruments. "Your lungs sound clearer than half my patients, and your color is returning nicely." "Then you'll certify me for the teaching position?" Catherine asked. "Gladly, though I'd like to examine you again before school starts in September." He inquired about Ayita's treatments, noting with interest the herbal remedies Catherine described. That evening, as Catherine returned to Ayita's cabin under a star-filled sky, she found the older woman waiting on the porch. "You were successful," Ayita said. "Not a question, but a statement." "Yes," Catherine confirmed. "The board voted to approve my appointment, pending Dr. Freeman's certification, which he's granted." "And Thomas Harrington? He opposed me vigorously, as expected, made quite a scene when he lost the vote. After a comfortable silence, Catherine asked about the history between Aita and Thomas. Aita explained that Thomas had arrived 5 years ago during the land run. Her husband John, who taught at the mission school, had publicly opposed Thomas's proposal to establish a whites-only school. The town council sided with John, a defeat Thomas never forgave. After John died, Thomas began his campaign to claim Aita's land. "And now I'm caught in this old conflict," Catherine murmured. "You chose a side when you accepted my shelter," Aita acknowledged. "The question now is whether you wish to remain there, knowing what it means." Catherine affirmed her commitment to their friendship, regardless of Thomas's disapproval. The Henderson barn had been transformed for the dance, with lanterns hanging from rafters and musicians setting up at one end. Catherine nervously smoothed her new blue calico dress as she and Aita approached. Mrs. Ellis greeted them warmly, though she discreetly indicated a corner where Thomas Harrington stood with several men, their occasional glares making their allegiance clear. For the next hour, Catherine met parents of future students and curious townspeople. When the music began, Jenkins asked her to dance, and despite initial hesitation, Catherine accepted. She found the familiar patterns returning as they moved through the Virginia reel. During a break, a 7-year-old girl approached. "Are you really going to be our new teacher, Ma'am?" Catherine knelt to the child's level. "I am, and who might you be?" "Lily Whitaker, Ma'am. I'll be in second reader come September." Later, Mr. Peterson, the elderly school board member, invited Catherine to dance a quadrille. As they moved through the figures, he provided unexpected insights. "Don't mind Thomas. He's always been a sore loser, even as a boy." He revealed he'd known the Harringtons for 3 generations. "Thomas isn't all bad. Generous when it suits him, efficient in business, just never learned to accept that not everyone sees the world as he does." When the dance ended, a young man intercepted Catherine. "Miss Blackwood, I'm Maxwell Harrington, Thomas's cousin. I've been hoping for an introduction." Unlike Thomas's cold assessment, Maxwell's gaze held frank appreciation that put Catherine immediately on guard. Nevertheless, she accepted his invitation to dance. As they waltzed, Maxwell drew her inappropriately close. "You've caused quite a stir in my cousin's well-ordered world," he remarked. "Not many would have the courage to oppose Thomas so directly." His increasingly familiar manner made Catherine uncomfortable until Sarah Harrington intervened, cutting in to rescue her. "I apologize for my cousin," Sarah said quietly. "Maxwell has a reputation for pursuing vulnerable women." "Thank you for the intervention," Catherine replied. "I was beginning to fear I'd need to cause a scene." Maxwell excels at creating situations where women must either endure his advances or appear hysterical when objecting. Thomas may be rigid and prejudiced, but at least his offenses are in plain sight. Maxwell is the snake in the grass. After the dance, Catherine rejoined Aita, suddenly tired. "You've danced enough for one night," Aita observed. "Your breathing is shallow." "Perhaps we should return home," Aita suggested. "You've accomplished what you came for, met the townspeople, established yourself as more than Thomas's rejected bride." As they left, Catherine noticed Thomas and Maxwell in what appeared to be a heated discussion. Maxwell's gaze followed them with undisguised interest. "The younger Harrington has noticed you," Aita remarked once they were outside. "Unfortunately," Catherine confirmed, explaining the uncomfortable dance and Sarah's warning. Ayita's expression darkened. Be vigilant with that one. Men like Maxwell believe women are conquests, not equals. They rode in companionable silence through the cool night. Despite the evening's mixed experiences, Catherine felt a growing certainty that she had found her place in this frontier community, not as Thomas Harrington's mail-order bride, but as her own woman, forging connections and purpose on her own terms. Tomorrow we begin preparing for winter, Ayita said as they approached the cabin. There are many plants to gather before the first frost, remedies to make, wood to stack. I'll help with everything, Catherine promised, and when school begins I'll still visit regularly. Yes, Ayita agreed. Our paths joined for a purpose greater than either of us first understood. That purpose will not end when you move to town. As they dismounted, Ayita paused, looking eastward. Rain coming tomorrow, she observed. Good. For the late plantings. How can you tell? Catherine asked, seeing nothing but stars. The air carries messages if we learn to read them, just as people do. Ayita turned to her. You read Maxwell Harrington correctly tonight. Trust that instinct. In the days to come, Catherine realized this wasn't just advice, but an acknowledgement. Ayita saw her not as a sickly Eastern woman to be protected, but as a capable ally with her own wisdom to contribute. I will, she promised. They carried the saddles inside, their movements in harmony after weeks of working together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight Catherine had crossed an important threshold, from outsider to community member, from rejected bride to respected teacher, from desperate traveler to woman of purpose, and it had all begun with a storm, a rejection, and the unexpected kindness of a Creek healer who saw value where Thomas Harrington had seen only weakness. As autumn painted the Oklahoma landscape in gold and crimson, Catherine stood before her students in the freshly whitewashed schoolhouse. Through the window, she could see Ayita in the schoolyard, teaching the children to identify healing plants, a special Friday lesson the school board had approved, despite Thomas's objections. Maxwell had departed after his unwelcome advances, were firmly rebuffed, leaving Thomas to nurse his wounded pride alone. Sarah had become Catherine's closest friend in town, their shared independence forming an unbreakable bond. Each weekend, Catherine returned to Ayita's cabin, continuing her education in Creek medicine. Together, they treated townspeople who once would have suffered in silence between doctors' visits. Even Thomas, stricken with pneumonia that winter, reluctantly accepted their remedies when Dr. Freeman insisted. The strongest healing comes when we bring different worlds together, Ayita often said, like your teaching and my medicine. And Catherine, who had arrived as a rejected bride, too sickly for frontier life, found herself thriving in the very community that had once dismissed her. Proof that sometimes our greatest rejections lead us to exactly where we belong. Up next, you've got 2 more inspiring stories waiting for you. If this one touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll never miss another tale of unexpected second chances.